How quickly can you surface the part that's uncertain? How rapidly can you shift your project, your endeavor, your field of interest, your relationship potentially, to kind of build off yesterday's message about heartbreak? Can you get to the part where you surface where there might be problems? So you can either untangle those sooner rather than later, or identify that they are, in fact, problems. Now, part of what I do as a game development trainer is that all the time I'm working with somebody who on their project, there's a piece of it that's really interesting, that they want to bury their energy into this like very, very curious problem. And to be fair, if it's a hobby project, then anything goes, suit yourself. But the dangerous thing is if in the process, they're using it as a way to put off answering the harder questions about, but what does the player really do? But what's the gameplay here? But is it any fun to play? Because all too often what happens is people will cycle months, sometimes years on a project before they really surface up, okay, but what's the play experience? But is it any good? All right, and this is part of why I rapid prototype, because I am attacking the question of, is this any fun to play before it looks good? Before it's been carefully engineered to be scalable? Is it any fun to play? How rapidly can we get to that question? And again, to tie into yesterday's video about heartbreak, another very common kind of heartbreak that is extremely common, that I unfortunately live at the forefront because of the line of work that I've chosen, see happen to a lot of people, or people come to me after they've had this problem and I help them not have these problems again, is the kind of heartbreak that comes from getting our heart set on a project, investing, like I say, months, sometimes years of time, sometimes non-trivial amounts of money, into a project where they keep cycling their energies on things that are fun to work on, interesting to work on, under the assumption that the rest is going to be fine, or maybe subconsciously putting off the uncertainty and discomfort they have about they're not sure if it's going to be fun. They'd rather either get to think it's going to be or not find out it won't be. And so they put off the actual core, what's the player do? What's the gameplay? What is this project? Is this any good? And what winds up happening is if we put those things off, then we get heartbroken from feeling this kind of shattered realization of there was a reason why we hadn't found a game like this before. That there's these subtle nuances about how it was so much easier in our head of how we assumed it would be, look, and feel to play than it actually is in reality. And this happens all the time, right? I mean, it's the same sort of thing as to, like you think about why when you're in a dream, it's difficult to tell you're in a dream. It's not because your brain can make things photorealistic, right? It's because your brain shows itself only the details it's looking for, which is sufficient to trick it 100% of the time, basically. Lucid dreaming notwithstanding, bit of a tangent, where you're going to see what you want to see, and you're going to not see the things you can't see, and that's why we have to build towards it or surface as rapidly as we can, answering those questions, the hard questions. Or, at least, like I say, maybe there's a solution, but let's untangle what that is, sooner rather than later. And when I tie this back to the relationship case, it really can mean, so in my dating history throughout life, like I'm vegan. We've mentioned this before in passing. I'm not trying to push on anybody. But at minimum, right, I didn't actually necessarily use as a filter. Some years I did, some years I didn't, whether or not the person was vegan. But certainly they have to be okay with the fact that I am. That if that was going to be something that they were going to expect that part of me to change, or that they were going to constantly fight me about that part of my life or otherwise, that was going to become a problem some point down the line. So let's get that out of the way sooner rather than later. Right? And the same sort of thing for a lot of people's paths in their relationships, lives might have to do with religious or philosophical or scientific agreements, political agreements, disagreements, etc. And so it's not saying you have to agree with each other. It's not saying you have to be the same as each other. But it is to say that you're willing to either respect the other person's position or, find strength through where there is some contention or otherwise, but that you want to at least not just put off thinking about things like how the other person does or doesn't manage their money, or how the other person does or doesn't, handle crises in their lives or otherwise, that those are important things that if people find ways to push off, exploring, addressing, discovering, uncovering, it's going to catch up to them later. And ideally, if those are going to be incompatible with people, it might be better to surface some of those differences sooner rather than later to figure out, is it something we can work out? And if it's not, again, it's not a judgment of the other person. It's okay, well, let's find something else with someone else that's going to work better for everyone involved. net gain. Same thing applies for, if you're looking for a job at a company, if you're working on a project, if you're writing a book, if you're doing a video course, whatever it is. It's how do you surface what's important so you can know that either you're now adding detail to something that was doing well, or you've at least been able to untangle that and figure out exactly what you're working with, and you can plan accordingly how much your energy, effort, time you're allocating to that without this sort of idealized, imagined hope of how it's going to be, completely disconnected from the reality of, but what are you capable of? But what's in your reach? But how are you gonna pull it off? How's it gonna be when you build it? And this is where we got to get people out of their comfort zone, just dreaming about ideas, just talking about things and building stuff, because real fast they surface all kinds of new discoveries about themselves, about their leadership style, about how they manage, about how they coordinate, about how they work, about their attention and energy and focus. And that's where the questions get interesting. And it stops being theoretical and starts being practical. That's the thought for the day. Just how do you surface in whatever it is you're doing? Steer towards surfacing the things that are maybe not as fun to work on, maybe not as interesting to you personally, but what are the uncertainty points? And I'll tell you maybe that the easiest way to answer this stuff, right, exact same way that the startup scene does it, it's in the agile or lean methodologies, is one of the better ways to surface where what matters is to find some way to do an early release. To find some way to be, whether it's getting testing, whether it's open alpha, whether it's putting out a smaller version of it. Rather than the 100-level version, let's make a 3-level version. Rather than the version with 10 characters, what's a version with 2 characters? Rather than having 20 different kinds of drivable cars, what's the one with 1 car? That's how we design our club projects, because it allows us to get a project that's out there, that exists, that's playable, that we can then get some distance from after it's out. We look at it, have some hindsight, think, was that worth taking further? And the answer is often no. Occasional answer is yes, and then we do so. But that's a great way to help you solidify and focus on what are the parts that matter, and is it being well received, and you can then decide things off that. So anyway, that's the thought for the day. Thanks for always tuning in. I'll have another video tomorrow. Bye for now.